Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to June on the Range. This is a great BookTube event created by Michael K. Vaughan last year to read and celebrate Western novels, to read Western novels and short stories, maybe talk about Western movies, and have a blast doing it. And when Mike first came up with this idea last year, I didn't have any. I loved it, of course. I think he has a genius for coming up with ideas like this. He's doing one for September. This coming September, he's inaugurating an event where we read Conan the Barbarian. Hoping that goes over really well as well. That's a terrific idea. But I confess, when June on the Range was first announced, I had no idea how popular it would be. I had no idea how many people would go to it. I actually thought I knew the kind of people, booktubers and otherwise, who would go to it. It would be old-style Western fans. And that turned out not to be true. Half the people, at least, who flocked to June on the Range did so because A, Mike's channel is incredibly welcoming, and B, they'd never tried a Western before and wanted to do it in friendly, full company. That was wonderful. To watch that happen was wonderful. So I have looked forward to this year's June on the Range, and I'm making the most of it. I'm doing a Steve. I'm pulling a Steve. I'm overindulging myself. I'm making many videos instead of one a week or whatever my co-hosts are doing. It's because every night, when it comes time for me to assemble my night's reading, I always say on this channel that I turn into a pumpkin at midnight and just read without any interruptions from the outside world from midnight until whenever I cuddle up at the bean and fall asleep, or whenever dawn comes up, or whichever comes first. That often isn't the case, as you readers will need no explanation. Often, I say that because it's a backdrop. It's an absolute backstop plan, but often I start that reading very early. I don't wait until midnight often. So I set up my night's roster of reading, the closest I come to a TBR. And for June, I am putting a Western on that pile. These things are 120 pages. It's not usually a burden to read one, to add it to the pile, unless the book I've got is really demanding, and alas, that has not really happened yet in June. The new release, I mean. So I did that last night, and I am still working on a pile of the old print paperback books that I bought in the intervening years since last year's June on the Range. And I picked one of those for last night. This is a little Lion Books 25-cent paperback with the yellow text block. This is Pistolman by Steve Frazee, which has a blurb from the Boston Globe. I promise it wasn't me. This comes from 1952. It's still in perfect condition. I mean, you wouldn't even know that I read this. I'm not particularly gentle on my stuff, but it's a perfectly solidly made thing. Boy, oh boy. Not only is that a marked difference from some of the mass market paperbacks that I've been reading for June on the Range that have literally fallen apart in my hands. Not only is it a testament, difference from that, but it's also a testament to the fact that the mass market paperback really is a perfect piece of technology. In a way that my beloved ebooks are not yet, and maybe never will be, since the industry seems to have abandoned them. I mean, this is, 70 years old. And I guarantee you that in 70 years, I will need a different device like this to use any of the stuff that's on this device. The stuff itself, the files themselves, I would probably be able to save them for 70 years because they aren't on any one device. But whatever the equivalent of this is in 70 years will be unrecognizable. Whereas in 70 years, if this is any indication, this will still be readable. All you need is sunlight. All you need is light to read it by, and you're fine. You're good to go. And this is the story of Clay Arbuckle. We've got a little illustration on the back there, as well as on the front. That's him on the cover, I assume. He's a young man, and the author, Steve Frazee, I am assuming that Steve Frazee, I'm just going to operate on the assumption that Steve Frazee is either a pseudonym or that he used pseudonyms, and under each pseudonym he wrote hundreds of books. I have to assume that all these guys are weirdos like that. All these Western pulp writers that I'm finding, they all have hundreds of books to their credit. The one thing I know about Steve Frazee, I racked my brains for it and came up with it, is something that I love him for so much that I would be willing to forgive him almost anything. None of you are going to remember this, and I don't have the ability to put up little pictures here. But once, a long, long time ago, 60 or 70 years ago, I think it might have been Disney, did a series of hardcover, little hardcover illustrated kids books. They did one for Tarzan. They did one for Lassie, I think, and Steve Frazee did one for Zorro. I know everything that happens in that book. I know the Tarzan book best of all, but I know everything that happens in that Zorro book. I had a copy of that when I was only 28 years old, and I read it until it fell apart. Until it fell apart. I had the Tarzan book. I remember very vividly I was given that book as a present, and oh, I love the Tarzan book, but I love the Zorro book too. And I think it had duotone illustrations. They weren't black and white. The illustrations had like a wash of color on them, but they weren't full color. And Steve Frazee wrote that. Now, I didn't detect anything like that here in this book. This takes place in the Dakota Badlands. And Steve Frazee has a way about him, a writing style about him. I ended up liking it. I ended up liking that style. It's a little bit on the florid side. Let me see if I can find you an example here. This didn't go well last time, but we'll try it again and see. This is about Arbuckle as he makes his way not only through the Badlands, but also as he makes his way into adulthood. He's not sure who he is. He's not sure where he belongs in the world. And when Steve Frazee says that early on in the book, that Clay Arbuckle is a bit of a mystery to himself, I rolled my eyes a bit, because usually when authors do that, when they pull that rabbit out of a hat and say that their main character is a mystery even to themselves, what that usually means is the author is saying, I don't want to build this character. I want to be free to have him do anything. So I'm going to say he's a mystery to himself. It's lazy storytelling, in other words. Whether it happens in a Steve Frazee Western novel from 1952 that no one's going to remember, or when it happens in, I don't know, a gigantically best-selling epic fantasy series that's never going to be finished. Something Killer Chronicles. No matter where it happens, if the writer says that the main character is a bit of a mystery, they're punting. And they shouldn't do that on your dime, or your 25 cents in this case. But here's an example of this is a description of a town. A murder has just taken place, and our main character, Clay Arbuckle, is still, at this point in the book, this is on page 38, callow and one-dimensional. And I'll give Steve Frazee his props that the Arbuckle does deepen in the course of this book, just a bit. But this is the description that we get. Not long after the sun went down, the town was full of men. There were horses at every hitch rack, and more animals than tie space at the rail in front of the horseshoe. Like the men who had ridden them, the horses showed a belly-tightened look from fighting years of drought. Men went in and out of Dutch's place aimlessly, it seemed, but they lacked the loudness that often goes with loafing. They drank coffee at the Comet Cafe, close to the dark office of the sheriff. They leaned against the building, talking of Sam Andrews. Southwark was so far from everywhere, Clay thought, that it must never have been a tough town. One killing had caused a buzzing mutter, underlaid with dread. The whole area apparently was disturbed. Clay tried to understand why one simple killing could lay such a cold hand on so many people. He judged the conversations that he overheard. There was no talk of vengeance, merely speculation and fear. So you can see right away there that is not the kind of dumb, flat, purple prose that we got in a couple of June on the Range entries so far. That's good, effective prose. Its main purpose in that one passage is to underscore how calloused and callow Clay Arbuckle is when the novel starts. One murder is enough to get everybody worried and all fussing and whatnot. It's meant to show that he is, toughened inside and out. It's a pretty neat cover that is ruined by the book publishers in the 1950s and 1960s used to do this kind of crap all the time. Just put a serial number on the front of it, because you notice there's no barcode on this. So that was good for inventory purposes. And the only reason that you would find a book like this in most used book venues is specifically because it doesn't have a barcode. If it had a barcode, it would be subject to those horrible insectile dealers with their little phone apps where they're scanning one barcode after another. And this ought to do well. This will make me 3/4 of a penny on eBay. I can really rook people about this one. If it doesn't have a barcode, they don't know anything about it. They don't care anything about it. It's not real. It can't make them any money on eBay, so they just disregard it. They couldn't care less about books. Oh, we're going to get some yoga. Oh, yes. Oh. We're gearing up for another walk. I think it's a little bit hot outside, almost 85 degrees Fahrenheit. That might be a little hot for a long walk, but we'll see. We'll see. She likes to stretch her legs, and so do I. And it's the penance that I pay for putting her through videos, because she doesn't know what I'm doing. She has no idea who I'm talking to. It seems really weird to her. But then again, considering how weird you people are, it really is really weird. Anyway, because as you can see from that prose, this is good reading. This was good reading. This was like 200 pages. No, 150 pages. And I was involved all the way to the end. There's a character that Arbuckle, he meets a lot of characters, including, inevitably, a fair little filly that he may or may not like. This is, once again, a very, very incel novel. I'm noticing a really fervid, virginal incel note to a lot of these westerns when it comes to talking about the main character's relationship with women. It suddenly the register of the whole book shifts. That's true here, but it's mercifully very downplayed. But one of the men that Arbuckle meets is very similar to one of the men that the main character met in yesterday's book. He's older, he's suaver, he's more sure of himself and more aware of the world. And you aren't sure right from the beginning whether or not it's going to come down to guns drawn between him and our nominal hero. And once again, as with The Bleeding Land, I was kind of wishing that maybe I'd learned more about that character. He certainly is more interesting than if I don't care whether or not Arbuckle ever grows up to be a compassionate or caring man, and Steve Frazee gives me no reason to care about that. But if I don't care about that, if I'm not somehow weirdly involved with whether or not this character becomes a better person, then I'm not going to care about the huge amount of space that's ladled out to him. Whereas a more complex and immediately a confessedly flawed character, I might be more interested in what happens to that kind of character. I felt that last year with a novel called Rafe that ended up just being about Rafe. Just, what's he going to eat for supper? When's he going to take a bath, his much-needed monthly bath? I guess there was an element of wish fulfillment involved here. You're selling these things to to guys that have maybe they shipped out for World War II. They have known what adventure was like, but now they're back home, and they commute from Scarsdale. They've got a job in the city. They work 9 to 5. They've got the house in the suburbs. They've got the kids they don't like. They've got the dog they can't name. They've got the wife they hate. And maybe you're selling them the chance to just inhabit a character like Clay Arbuckle and just be them. So maybe that is the point of books like this, but it didn't really work for me. I can't fault this book on any of the technical grounds. I actually, when I finished with it, one of my first thoughts was, I would definitely read another Steve Frazee novel. That hasn't been the rule for June on the Range in 2023. I would definitely read another one, but not because it did anything real for me, just because it was so competently done. So that's my pick for today. Perfect condition. Even after a Steve reading. Perfect condition. Of course, it helps. When you've got paperbacks in the bed, it really helps that you don't have an 85-pound basset hound who's going to roll over on it and destroy it. Frida doesn't come anywhere near any of my human things. She thinks they're really odd and probably mean I'm a loser. So she doesn't have an interest in biting things, dragging them around, rolling on top of them. Oh my God, if there was even a paper clip and she rolled onto it, she would jump a mile and say, what on earth is this? Can't get good house cleaning at all anymore. So, not a dud at all. Not a dud. Actually, my BookTube event reading last night, my Star Trek book and my Western were both kind of not a dud. Well done. But nothing elaborate, nothing knocking my socks off. I can always hope for that. That is the hope in which we all proceed from one book to the next. So I'll pick another Western, and I will report back tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.